zweimal Oma geworden. Im Vorfeld sozusagen Kinderbetreuung bei der Kindergarten ausgefallen war.
Und deine Tochter hier in München?
Oh. Und das war ich dann den ganzen Spielbus zurück in München.
Ja.
Und davor bin ich gebeutelt mit Hochwasser und mit Krieg und hatte 3 Monate und es war nicht abgeschlossen, das Haus wieder in Ordnung.
Ich hatte auch einen Wasserschaden. Der ging von Ende Oktober bis, ich habe jetzt wirklich alles wieder richtig geräumt. Weil dann zum Beispiel, ich hatte da in dem einen Zimmer einen riesigen Kleiderschrank, weißt du, so dieses 4-, 5-türige Hoch. Und dann musste abgebaut werden und dann haben die Schreine.
Ach, ihr dürftet nicht auch betroffen oder?
Also es war, ich habe ja unten 2 Zimmer und oben und das war, und das ist ja Maisonette, das heißt, und ganz oben war ein Wasserrohrbruch und es ist so durch so einen Schacht runter und hat man erst bei mir unten gemerkt. Und da waren, also in einem Zimmer mussten alle Wände gemacht werden, aber nur so, also sagen wir mal, das Zimmer, wenn das so riesig ist, dann musste die und die mal gemacht werden und die haben sie nicht gemacht.
Da konntest du aber noch deine Sachen sozusagen...
Nee, es musste alles raus, weil der gesamte Boden gemacht werden musste, den konnte man halt nicht nur hier machen.
Hast du es zu spät gemacht oder war es so heftig?
Ja, also das ist ein Zimmer, da gehe ich nicht täglich rein und dann war meine Schwiegermutter sollte Geburtstag haben und dann musste ich da rein, um das eben irgendwie für meinen Sohn so zu richten und für meine Tochter und deren Freund. Und dann gehe ich da rein und denke, es riecht so gut. Und dann war alles an den Tapeten so feucht, dann habe ich das angelangt, das war feucht und dann ging das ratzfatz, ne? Also ganz oben habe ich ja erst nichts gemerkt. Naja, und dann haben sie also den gesamten Boden neu gemacht in dem einen Zimmer, dann hatte ich 4 Wochen lang diese Kochgeräte, kennst du? Und die hatte ich oben und unten, weil oben war auch ein bisschen in der Wand was im Bad. Dann musste da am Bad mussten ein paar Kabeln weg und gemacht werden. Dann das eine Zimmer musste ganz neu gefliest werden, weil dann den einen in das eine Ecke und das andere. Dann war das ja über Weihnachten, dann war meine Schwiegermutter am Sterben, dann konnte ich auch nicht immer da sein. Aber es war heftig. Und als ich dann dachte, jetzt hat es gepackt, so der Schrank aufgebaut werden und die Schreiner hat gesagt, ja, die Schläge sind ja gar nicht mehr da. Die hatte ich verschwunden. Ich schmeiß noch meine Schläge weg und am Ende haben sie doch wieder aufgebaut und dann habe ich mit dem Schläger angekippt und genau die dran waren, also die hatten also es war ein einziges Theater und das war Ende Oktober haben wir es festgestellt. Anfang, Mitte März hatte ich meinen Schrank stehen und dieser Schrank fast 4 Türen, der ist natürlich auch voll. Dann war das mein altes Arbeitszimmer, da waren 10 Billis mit Büchern, 10 Billis mit Büchern, doppelt gestellt. Meine gesamte Tür war also es war schon heftig. Am schlimmsten war die Zeit mit den Eiern. Man hier sicher auch.
Ja, das ging auch. Den einen noch mal in den Keller. Also kann man nicht so schnell ins Keller aufgehoben.
Und weggeschmissen. Ja, und es ist ach so. Ja, aber es ist noch ein anderer. Ja. Also ich habe auch
aber wir haben uns doch
wir haben uns hier schon mal
ja, das war dann danach.
Ja.
Also noch der Meinung,
ja, also ich bin dann, als meine Schwiegermutter dann tot war und der Schrank stand, da habe ich gedacht, so jetzt muss ich erstmal weg und dann bin ich erstmal tot. Ja, das war schon. Also ich war nur in Marrakesch.
Ich weiß, die werden ja mehr oder weniger im Ghetto gehalten.
Nee, also das war jetzt, da hast du da gar nichts von. Also ich würde jetzt nicht so gerne nach Griechenland fahren. Ich würde wahrscheinlich überall Kreta. Aber Kreta liegt so.
Also halt.
Ich habe so versucht. Ja, ich war ja viel reisen. Und allmählich komme ich so in den Stiefel rein. Also ich denke, Aber was mit die alt sind, keine Enkelkinder jetzt? Was sind das junge Mädchen? Als Jungs. Was soll die Namen sagen? Max. Bayerisch, ne? Wurde schon manchmal. Ja, meine Tochter ist ja jetzt nicht so einfach. Die ist ja transplantiert und als Transplantierte schwanger zu werden, dann muss man eine ganze Menge vorher regeln und manchmal Medikamente wechseln. Aber trotzdem ist es ein bisschen schwieriger, aber bis jetzt hat sich da noch nichts getan und mein Sohn ist zwar 12 Jahre. Ja, weil du dann die Fähren zahlst. Also so. Aber es ist einfach. Du hast dann einfach bei deiner Tochter gewohnt, die Kleine, die anderen versorgt.
Wenn ich Stress habe, dann kann ich nächste Woche in die USA. Schon 2 Jahre. Und jetzt bin ich bei der Tagung und mit dem Personal.
Bis 14 Uhr haben Sie offen. Dann versuche ich vorher irgendwie vorbeizukommen.
Und dann wollen wir kaum warm und wollen ein bisschen den Nordwestbereich bisher Washington wollen. Und dann wollen wir Zeitzug nehmen, der nur Panoramawagen mit Glasdach. Der fährt von Chicago rüber und das ist der ich war nie auf der Spur der alten
Und wenn
wir werden zwar noch sein, kann es ja schauen, aber das ist ja dann wir fangen ins Jahr dran und wir wollen aber dann mehr oder weniger danach
du sagst ja aber it's only a word.
Zweimal mit Random
Da ist eine
für alle 10 Minuten neu erzählt.
Wollen wir es als Leben?
das heißt ganz genau, was sie ja, deswegen sagt man ja auch, sie soll es nicht zeigen. Aber das kann natürlich nicht wegen Arroganz erzählen gehen.
This is the final round. Before November 8th, we will have quite a number of lectures commenting, explaining, probably excusing one of the other headlines we get from America. As you know, Hillary is back on her campaign, and but it's not only the race. It's at the moment, I just learned this morning that there is an incredible problem between the Pentagon and the Foreign Office, and they obviously do not agree in how far secrets should be exchanged between Russia and America. Anyway, it's just the right time, and we have the right person, certainly the right title. Adam Garfinkle, I became aware of at least 20 years ago. And I became a reader, and I learned a lot. It's probably what you call over here sort of center-right kind of positioning in the media. This maybe is my personal opinion, but it is intellectually demanding and interesting and colorful and a very knowledgeable magazine, which I recommend to you. It's called The American Interest, and it had a predecessor, that was the National Interest. In a way, the background is still largely the same. Famous people who actually initiated the national interest, such as Francis Fukuyama, Eliot Cohen, Brzezinsiki Josef Joffe, you know, from the Zeit, and Ruth Wedgewood, but sort of the uniting spirit was Adam Garfinkle. He was trained at the University of Pennsylvania and started his career in research and in the political arena, where he did basically work in the foreign policies. So he taught US foreign policy, and particularly the policies, American policy towards the Near and Middle East. He taught at the Universities of Pennsylvania and Johns Hopkins, also Tel Aviv and others. And he has also practical experience. He was in the planning staff of almost utopian setup, security and 21st century, known as the Hart-Rudman Commission. He was an assistant to Senator Henry Jackson, and was also a speechwriter. And we know how important they are. And actually they are the brain behind the mouth that speaks. Today he is here for a good reason. We all are surprised about the career of what we call Wirtschaftsasylant. You know, we have not such a nice name for people who emigrate for economic reasons. We actually stigmatize them as that's not a good motif. If you run away because you want to save your life, that's okay. But if you run away to make a good life, that's not so good. That's why it's always a reason to exclude people. Now, Trump is someone whose grandfather came just about on the beeline, about 127 kilometers from here. His grandfather was a friend of the grandfather of Heinz's, you know, the ketchup Heinz's. They all came from the same little village, Karlstadt. And his grandfather, Trump's, wanted to come back, but he was rejected during the First World War. Now, anyway, we're still surprised what's happening in America. Strange careers, but America, in a way, is known for that you can make it. And it's not only sung about it, you can make it everywhere if you make it in New York. And so far, Trump is a New Yorker. But, of course, on an international level, we have our doubts and we have problems with one or the other comments he makes and when he talks about nuclear power and the red button, you know, why not use it if it is there? And about immigrants from Mexico and other places, that's somehow should be debated, and we should get more information. And I think, Adam, now it's your turn, and we are very happy to do, for the first time, we do a kind of live streaming. So people who cannot make it and tell us ahead of time, we will continue to invite them, but you can also have it at home. In that case, if you like your food best at home, just stay at home. So, welcome, Adam.
Thank you, Jacob. It's good to be in Heidelberg. It's good to be here. I've been to Germany 8 or 9 times. I've never been to Heidelberg for some reason, so it's nice to see it. My wife, who was with me, spent 3 months here, but it was 46 years ago. She claims not to remember very much after 46 years. I can't think why. Things are pretty weird in the United States. I don't know if any of you have been there lately, but even observing from afar, things are not normal. And they're not normal in a good way. They're normal in a kind of a scary, frightening way to a lot of people. Let me give you some sense of what it means. I noticed in this room, as opposed to the students that I've been talking to mostly when I was in Leipzig and Nuremberg, that you will remember back to around that period, not too long after my wife was spending 3 months in Heidelberg. Now, imagine if somebody had said to you in the mid-1970s, right around that time, that in your lifetime you would see a US election in which the candidate of one major party was anti-free trade, pro-Moscow, and anti-plutocratic, talking about the terrors of corruption in the government. And the other party, the other candidate of the other major party, was basically status quo, conventional, mired in scandal, however, but the party that had managed to seize the mantle of the most patriotic party in this particular moment. It would all make sense, except the parties would be reversed. Now it's the Republican Party that is best described by the first set of attributes, and the Democratic Party that is best described by the second set of attributes. And you would think that this might mean that the situation is either upside down or, in the vernacular, a little crazy. Well, it seems like that because it probably is. There is, however, a way to explain this, and that's what I'm going to try to do briefly. A half an hour is not a long time to be able to, to sort of express all of the peculiarities and irregularities of this particular election season. Nor, I think, frankly, is water the right thing to be drinking when you're trying to get through this. Nevertheless, despite those handicaps, let me see what I can do. First thing that I try to do in preparing any kind of presentation on the subject is to devise a simple analytical framework to help me make sense of what variables matter and what variables don't. So what I did was I sort of created a 2x2 matrix. And here are the axes that I used to sort of fix my thinking about how to make a presentation. There are some things about this election, some aspects of it that are peculiar to the United States because of its history, its institutions. For example, it's presidential as opposed to parliamentary form of democracy, which affects the way that when and how coalitions are built among various political factions. But some of the aspects of what's going on right now far transcend the United States. They apply to all Western countries, and even in some respects to countries beyond the West. And it's interesting, to me it's interesting, if you look at what's going on in Europe, in many European countries, if not most, including Germany, underlying sensibilities and certain key trends are more aligned today than they have ever been at any given four-year presidential election interval that I can remember. All right. So the kind of sentiment that you see in Britain and that expressed itself in the Brexit vote, of course there are many differences. It's not wildly dissimilar from some of the things going on right now in the United States. And one of the reasons I think is very obvious. There's a certain similarity between the way that an unemployed auto worker near Detroit feels and the way that an unemployed steel worker near Sheffield feels. We have more in common in a broad sense than we used to. And one of the reasons is that the overarching trends, the global political economy, now has more of a variance, more of an influence over the United States than it used to. The United States is a huge country with an enormous domestic market. But over the years, international economic engagement and cultural engagement has played an ever greater role in the United States, so that we have now sort of caught up to the interdependence levels and the 25-year aftermath of the Cold War. And we are more alike now in many respects than we used to be, though we are also still different in many. So that's the first axis, things that are peculiar to the United States and things that are broader in their impact. And then the other axis goes like this. There are some things that are going on right now, some causal factors in what we see that are relatively proximate, fairly recent. Or some of them turn on idiosyncratic factors like personality, things like that. But when I say recent, I mean within the last 10 years. So that, say, for example, the so-called Great Recession of 2007 and 2008 and into 2009, depending on how you count, that has, and the aftermath of that Great Recession has had a considerable bearing on the trajectory of American politics ever since. On the other hand, there are factors that are not proximate but remote. So, for example, if you look into the overlay of racial and class antagonisms in the United States that have given rise to some of the cleavages that you see express themselves in the election, some of these factors have their origins 4 centuries ago. All right? So if you have a 2x2 matrix, American and more broad, and the other axis, proximate and remote, you can draw your 4 quadrants, like any 2x2 matrix, and you can tick off a more granular list of the factors that might be at play in each of those 4 boxes, and then you can try to wrap your mind around how all these factors interact, and with what weight. Okay, that's how a social scientist would look at this if they were trying to do an honest analysis. Now here's the problem. Now that I've given you this framework, which I hope you can use actually to hang particular facts and impressions on, so that you can try to find a unity in the manifold, as Kant would have put it, though not in English, of course. What you realize is that practically everything matters. You come to a presidential election, it's kind of like a condensation of all sorts of ambient influences at play. And so you could realistically and fairly speak about practically everything that has to do with American politics, culture, and economy, and society. It all plays into the melange of factors that is shaping the election campaign. Now, obviously, I can't do that in a half an hour. So let me get right to the quick and explain in sort of in telegraphic sense what's going on. And then, when I'm finished doing that briefly, I'll tell you not who's going to win, because nobody knows, but I'll tell you how to tell. It's now 54 days away, I think, something like that, the election. I'll tell you how to tell who's likely to win as time rushes upon us. What is most characteristic of this election campaign is that we saw 2 populist insurgencies. One from the right, from Donald Trump, and one from the left, from Bernie Sanders. Now, this isn't the first time in American history that there have been populist insurgencies. If you think back to the 1880s and into the turn of the last century, if you know the name of William Jennings Bryan, the populists, and then the Progressive Party, there was a great deal of churn at that time, a great deal of populism. It really started with the creation of the Grange in the 1880s. That's pretty esoteric American history. I wouldn't be surprised if most of you don't know anything about the Grange. But it all had to do with the end of an economic era, the era of essentially commercial agriculture. The American dream back in those days was the family farm. Self-sufficiency, the family farm, commercial agriculture comes into being. A lot of people, thanks to the Homestead Act and other factors, immigration, a lot of people head west and they set up farms and hope to make their confident and self-sustaining living on these grand American farms. And then what happened, a lot of other countries, Canada, Australia, Argentina, they also got into commercial agriculture. Methods of transportation and communication rapidly increased. It was a kind of an age of globalization in the sense that technology was driving a lot of the economic and social forces. And what happened? Commodity prices collapsed. And a lot of these farmers found themselves overextended with credit, unable to pay back the banks. And you had this uprising of populist discontent that William Jennings Bryan tried 3 times to ride into the White House, but failed. And of course, it wasn't just William Jennings Bryan. American politics were roiled with populism for decades, even into the first few decades of the 20th century in some respects. So we've seen this before, all right? What is happening now is similar, arguably, in the following sense. We are also at the end of another sort of epoch of socioeconomic structure, and that is the end of what's classically the industrial age. We have a lot of oversupply in the world. People that have a lot of money are trying to figure out where it's worth investing it, not finding as many opportunities as maybe they would like. So a lot of money floods to U.S. Treasury notes. Even though they're getting almost no interest, it's still at least safe. So a lot of money is coming into the United States for not necessarily the right reasons. But anyway, the point is there are certain similarities between the end of the 19th century and what is happening now. We've seen a lot of this before. In terms of politics, you can see that there's a lot of discontent with the way that the political economy has developed over the past 25 years, especially over the past 15 years, I'd say. And I'll go back and explain why I picked those numbers. If you look at the stratification of economic cohort quintiles in the United States, what you see over this period of 15, 20, 25 years or so, what you see is that people at the very top of the pile, so to speak, the 1/2 of 1% or the 1% colloquially expressed, they've done very well over the past during this period. And that always happens when there is a lot of technological innovation and a lot of social churn. Again, you see it in a series of waves. A Russian economist named Nicholas Kondratiev explained this, tried to theorize about this with his waves that follow certain technological trends. So the top 1/2 of 1% has done very well in this period. Some say obscenely well. But others below them, into the 10th and 20th and 30th, the upper middle class, they've also done really pretty well. On the other side of the cohort curve, you have relatively poor people, in the from the 5th to the 15th or 18th percentile. They've also done fairly well. If you look at the actual numbers, but you include third-party exchange or welfare payments and other sort of government benefits that are not necessarily monetarized, they've also done pretty well. There's still poverty in the United States, of course, but much of it's been alleviated. And as far as the American black population, we now have, after the past 25 years, and going back a little further, a very substantial and quite stable black middle class. So part of the racial class issue in the United States is that people are still looking at this issue through a very old prism, in which they see black or white, as though the black community is a monolith in the United States. It's no longer the case. I worked for 2 black people who were my superiors at the State Department, Colin Powell and Condoleeza Rice. Now, of course, they're unusual examples in that they both became Secretary of State, but there are lots of examples. And if you've hung around the United States a lot for the last 25 years, you see that. So it split the black community. In some ways, people who are on the bottom of this split are actually worse off than they were 25 years ago. You could make a good case for that. But it's no longer a monolithic community, so there's a lot of confusion over the relationship between class and race in the United States. The people who have really lost out are the ones kind of like beyond the truly poor, the working blue class, blue-collar people. People, generally speaking, who are associated with union jobs, still associated with union jobs. People that tend to have lower education than cohorts above them in the socioeconomic scale. People who tend to have less social capital, people who tend to live in more rural or isolated places. These are just generalities, but that seems to be what the data points to. These are the people who have gotten smeared in the past 25 years. At best, their real wages have stagnated against inflation. In many cases, they've actually declined. This is where people have left the labor force, no longer looking for jobs, especially males, for reasons we can talk about if you are interested. This is where the anger and the frustration and the sense of betrayal exists. This is the font of what I have called the Trumpenproletariat. Now, I know that this is understandable to you who speak German, because you know what Lumpenproletariat is, and you know who Karl Marx was. However, I've had a lot of trouble in the United States getting people to see the humor in the neologism. I guess that can't be helped. These are the people who've been smeared, and these are the people who believe that the two major parties and the bicoastal elite in the United States have essentially ignored and betrayed them. And that the problems that they are suffering right now, and it's not just money, right? It's a question of dignity. It's a question of, can I feed my family? The males who've been raised in certain ethnic communities in particular to believe that they are the people who the family depends on. They have to be the breadwinner. They are the protector of the hearth, right? If they can't get jobs that can achieve that expectation of them, bad things happen. They get bitter. There's a lot of substance abuse associated with people who have fallen out of the labor pool like this. There's been a lot of destruction of community because of the derangement of the labor profile in this segment of the American economy. All right? This is the focus of the discontent. This is where the Schumpeterian creative destruction feels a lot more like destruction than it does feel like creativity. Okay? Now, you can date this, and I can bring this up to date to show you why the election today looks the way that it looks. In the year 1999, during the last year, second to the last year of the Clinton administration, not Hillary, Bill, the United States granted most favored nation status to China. In the year 2000, we made it permanent. Based on the momentum of the negotiations over MNS status, China entered the World Trade Organization early in 2001, during the Bush administration. What that did was it opened up a flood of investment from the United States into China, and not just from the United States. A lot of investment, including from Germany, flowed into China. The idea being that the World Trade Organization membership would bind China, if not to the rule of law as we understand it, in terms of property rights and so on, then at least to some rule of law. And by then, a lot of investors were already getting very tired of dealing with post-Soviet Russia, where there is no rule of law at all to speak of. And so money poured into China. From the United States, what that effectively meant is that transnational companies essentially based in the United States, for all practical purposes, became Chinese companies. The money went to China, the exports went to China, the production was in China, and the profits largely stayed in China or left China for some offshore shell corporation in the Cayman Islands or the British Virgin Islands or wherever, and then the profits being sometimes repatriated back to the United States and sometimes not, most likely reinvested elsewhere, including in places like Vietnam and other low-wage production platforms in Asia. Now, if you then project ahead a couple of years, let's project ahead 10 years or so, 11 years. In the 10 years after these events that I just described, you look at, for example, the change in the trade deficit between the United States and China. And if you graph it, it looks like a ski jump. I won't give you the numbers, but they are galactic in scale. But more important than that, depending on whose data you believe in, and actually all these numbers are a little soft, so you have to watch out. But I think the consensus goes something like this, that between, in this decade that I'm speaking of, the United States lost 31.6% of its manufacturing jobs. That's almost a third in just 10 years. That is a lot. And of course, when manufacturing jobs disappear and are not replaced by capital in the United States because the capital has been sent abroad, secondary and tertiary service jobs that depended on those industries also are greatly harmed. So you had a dramatic slowdown in the American economy. This was masked to some extent at the time because of the novelty of the IT revolution and some of the early productivity gains in that Kondratiev wave from the IT revolution, which have worked their way through for about the last, 18, 20 years in the American economy. But it was very uneven. The boost that the economy got during, for example, the late Clinton administration, late Bush administration years, it caused a lot of perturbation. There was a lot of people were making a lot of money, but it wasn't very evenly distributed kinds of money. So thanks to other changes that we don't have time to talk about, large corporations were doing pretty well. They were sitting on a lot of cash. Banks did extraordinarily well. Hedge funds did even better. But the average Joe, the average guy I'm talking about in this, 18 to 25% quintile of the socioeconomic structure, they didn't do well at all. They did very badly. Okay. So what happens? I mean, imagine you're a Martian, you come from Pluto, and you're totally objective, and you don't care about this, you have no emotion. You're just an objective observer. You come down to the planet Earth, and what do you see? Okay, in the middle of this business, right, what do you see? You see, in 2007 and 2008, you see a massive crash of the housing market. Why did that happen? Well, there are lots of reasons, and if you've seen the movie or read the book, The Big Short, which Michael Lewis is a book and now a film, I highly recommend. If you don't want to read the book, watch the movie. It's in English, but you speak English. Watch the movie. I mean, the verisimilitude between the movie and what really happened is pretty darn close. And it's just bone-chilling to watch what's going on. You have the fragilization or the criminalization of the entire housing professionals in the United States, including the rating agencies, the banks, you name it. They were breaking the law in spades. Only one poor banker went to jail as a kind of a scapegoat. None of these guys were ever really punished, but there was basically criminal activity, a scoundrel cascade, a race to the bottom in professional practice. But what really matters is that the speculative bubble in housing could no longer be sustained because people had lost their jobs. Why couldn't people who were, bankers had been lending money to people who were kind of, marginal credit risks for a long time, and the housing market didn't collapse. Why did it collapse in 2007, 2008? Because a lot of those people lost their jobs and they could no longer pay their mortgages, right? So you had a total shift in the valence of the economy. So people particularly in the United States, people think that, the outsourcing phenomenon that I spoke about with regard to China and the trade deficit issues and so on, and then the housing crash and the onset of the Great Recession are not connected, but they're tightly connected. I mean, again, the change in the job profile and the outsourcing is not the only thing that caused the Great Recession, but it's clearly related to it. And so to see these phenomena as totally separate, I think, is to be analytically remiss. So then what do you see? You see the Tea Party movement basically percolate into the Republican politics at roughly the same time, 2006, 2007, 2008, and then you see Occupy Wall Street, okay? From a slightly different point, but really sensing the same angst, the same ambient insecurity and trouble at being confused about what was going on. Now, most people think of an ideological spectrum as a line, with the left there. I mean, that would be your right. You get, what I mean, the left there and the right there. It's much more useful to think about an ideological spectrum, however, not as a line, but as a horseshoe. Because the extremes on both sides end up having a lot more in common than even they are likely to admit. Occupy Wall Street and the Tea Party had a lot more in common than either side, for cultural reasons, wanted to admit. And it was basically anti-Wall Street. It was anti-gigantism. It was anti-big box. It was anti-conventional politician. It was anti-plutocracy. They had all that in common. They just had different conceptions about how it happened and what to do about it. All right? Could you actually get these people to sit down together over a cup of tea and have a civil conversation? No. But that doesn't mean that they didn't have really a lot in common. So now, the Occupy Wall Street movement was the on-ramp for the Sanders campaign. And the Tea Party, in a slightly different way, was the en route for the Trump campaign. I mean, the timing is absolutely perfect. I mean, any other aspects of explaining what has happened would essentially be violating Occam's razor. You would end up with an overdetermined explanation. What I've explained to you now, that's really all you need, pretty much, to explain what you see. Okay? So this is about Schumpeterian churn, roiling, change. We have a government in the United States. We don't have a strong state, strong federal state like Germany does for historical reasons. But basically, institutions are conservative. And the changes now are so deep and so fast that the institutions are not keeping up. And the conventional politicians in the United States, the political class in the United States, both for pecuniary reasons and also just for intellectual reasons, are wedded to these very conservative, conservatively moving institutions, and they don't understand, most of them don't understand what has been happening. And the United States has become class insulated to an extraordinary degree in our history. So you have this Boston-Washington sort of corridor, and you have the guys in the West Coast, California. I would be worried, actually I thought California was part of the United States, but because they're nuts out there. But anyway, you have an insularity, a class insularity, the likes of which we've never seen before in American society. You have a lot of bitterness between the classes. So for example, when people look at the Truppen proletariat, they basically see deplorables. They basically accuse all of these people of being racists or misogynists and so on. That is not true. Meanwhile, if you are looking at it from the trailer camp out up to the elite, and you read the crawl below any article from the Atlantic or any magazine, you read what these people say on the crawl, the troll crawl, below the line, you know, the commentary on articles, and your blood runs cold. You know, I mean, it's just outrageous. Conspiracy theories and the anti-Semitism and you name it, it's starting to come out of the woodwork. So there is this bitterness. It's a culturally founded, economically, but also culturally founded bitterness that is giving a character to this campaign that we've never seen before. Then you have Trump himself, his personality and his experience. He has brought the language of reality TV into American political discourse for the first time. He has pierced the membrane. And people are now saying and thinking thoughts in a manner that we've really never seen before. This is going to have long-term influence on American political culture, not a good one. It's not the only, I mean, there are other factors that are going on here too. The role of the media, which I don't have time to talk much about, has been essentially an unwitting, run-to-the-bank accomplice of the Trump campaign. A lot of that has to do with some changes in the FCC. First, the Republicans changed the FCC, and then the Democrats in the last year of the Clinton administration changed the rules about broadcasting, so that today, as opposed to 1934 and really up till about the mid-1980s, when the FCC basically looked at the airwaves, the bandwidth, as though it were a commons like the forest. And therefore, if companies were going to be using it, they had a responsibility to the public to use it in certain ways. So, for example, if a candidate could get on the ballot in any state, then a radio station or a television station was obligated to give that person airtime to explain their views. But now, after the Republican and then the Democratic reform of the FCC, there is now there are no regulations whatsoever as pertaining to either ownership or content on the news waves. So you see a kind of a devolution into what I would call a post-factual political campaign, where facts don't really matter, even if they could be adduced. It's really a swirl of emotion and innuendo from both sides. So again, there are many influences that can be brought to bear here. Who's going to win amid this mess? Who's going to win? Well, nobody knows, and here's one reason that you should not be paying any attention to the CBS or any of the polls in the United States. These people don't know what they're doing. Okay, you remember the Brexit polls? How good did they turn out, right? Now, the samples are too small. I mean, again, looking at it from a social science point of view, you can't talk to 620 people and have a large enough sample to actually make a conclusion from. And that's what these people are doing. Plus, they're calling people who have landlines. So they're skewing the sample by just using a certain technology and not others. Moreover, they're not going out into the low social media, low social capital areas where a lot of the Trump supporters live. They're not in the sampling pool. I mean, I don't trust any of these polls. Don't forget, polling in the United States is not a social science enterprise or a government operation. It's a business. The pollsters sell their data to the media. So they have to sell something, and they'll sell it to anybody who buys it, whether it's a scientifically proper poll or not. So that's what you see in the newspaper and here on the radio. It's just a bunch of nonsense. Don't believe the polls. So we don't know who's going to win. And I would say that there are 3 wild cards that we have to be mindful of between now and November 8th. One is the Russians. The Russians have all 33,000 of Hillary's deleted emails from her State Department server, and they have already dropped a couple of nasty-smelling eggs into the American political arena. They dropped another one yesterday when they hacked my former boss, Colin Powell's email, last 2 years of his email. Why did they do it? Because he had some not particularly pleasant laudatory things to say about Hillary Clinton. He had worse things to say about Donald Trump, but that doesn't matter. Everybody assumes that. So what did the American media pick up on? The nasty remarks about Hillary, which was the intention. Yet another example of media complicity, witless media complicity in helping the Russians to interfere in the American campaign. Why wouldn't the Russians do that? They don't really like Donald Trump, although a lot of Russian oligarchs have a lot of money in Trump's building enterprises. They just simply want to make America as ungovernable as possible, which is what any great power in conflict with another great power would do. So there's no big surprises here, folks. But they're going to dump more. Most people in Washington expect an October surprise. We have no idea what the Russians can say about Hillary, because even the NSA doesn't have the 33,000 deleted emails. I mean, the NSA didn't hack the Democratic National Committee server, but the Russians did it. So we don't know what it's going to be, but it's probably not going to be nothing. How significant it will be, again, nobody can really say. Second wild card is that the leadership of the Islamic State, of Daesh, has a similar motive. And so I worry that sometime in October there's going to be a spectacular telegenic terrorist attack in the United States. On the order of Orlando or San Bernardino, something like that. I mean, just 2 guys with machine guns and a couple of bombs can make a mess. And again, the media would be all over it because it sells market share. It's good for market share. And they will hype it, and they will report it in an hysterical way for maximum dislocation effect, which will of course benefit Donald Trump. There are more swing states this time than usual. Usually there are 5 swing states that are in play, that have so many electoral college votes. Arguably this year there may be more, including states like North Carolina, maybe even Utah. Can you imagine? The Mormons don't like Donald Trump a lot. Michigan, Wisconsin even. So a telegenic terrorist attack at the right moment might be able to change just enough voters, scare enough people, steer them toward Donald Trump, the man on the white horse, the law and order candidate, supposedly, to make a difference in enough swing states to swing the election. It's not unthinkable. And the third wild card is health. And we've seen a lot about this lately with Hillary's pneumonia and so forth. But Trump is 70, right? He's not exactly a spring chicken. I'm 65 and I know, trust me. And I don't think anything's likely to happen that's really decisive in that regard, but one can't rule it out. So those are 3 wild cards. But here's what I would say you should be looking for. It seems to me that if the turnout in the election is about the same as it was 4 years ago, and 8 years ago, and 12 years ago, that would bode well for Hillary Clinton. But if the turnout is either much lower, it's statistically significantly lower than the norm in recent elections, or if it is higher than the norm in recent elections, then I think you have to watch for that to advantage Donald Trump. Why? Again, a lot of the people who might come out of this trough in the American socioeconomic spectrum to vote for Trump are alienated people. They haven't seen a candidate that spoke like them, felt like them, made them, got a rise out of them for a really long time. I mean, Mitt Romney wasn't the guy, right? John McCain was not the guy. I mean, these are civilized, responsible people, whatever you think of them. But Trump really pushes their buttons. I mean, when Trump says things like, if I lose the election, that means that it was fixed, it was stolen, Or even worse, when he says, well, if I lose, then the NRA guys, the National Rifle Association guys, the guys with the guns, they'll take care of Hillary later. We've never heard a speech like that in an American presidential campaign, at least not since 1828. Since Martin Van Buren said nasty things about Andrew Jackson, most of which, of course, were true. I mean, this is incitement to political murder, to violence. We've never seen anything like this. But this is the stuff that the guys, you know, this group of Trump proletariat that I described to you, this is what they like. They like bullies who push back. They love the fact that Trump is deliberately not politically correct. Because they are tired of being told to shut up as though they were 13-year-olds who don't have a right to express their own opinions. Because that's not au courant, you know? And frankly, I sympathize with that. My father was a Teamster. I know a lot of people who, you know, who feel that way. And again, they're not all deplorables. They're not all racist. Some are. So these people are going to come out and vote for the first time in 25 years, right? And how many will do that? Nobody knows. But if the participation rate is high, that's who's making it high, and that's going to tend to help Trump. On the other hand, if it's lower than normal, what does that mean? It might mean that, you know, the younger cohort that felt the burn and went out for Bernie Sanders, and certain minorities who were like pulled along in that train won't vote at all. A lot of them have a really hard time supporting Hillary Clinton. I mean, they're young, they're impressionable. Sanders ran against Clinton. He made a lot of telling hits against her, like a lot of them being true. A lot of these young folks just are not going to go to the polls and vote for Hillary Clinton as a lesser evil. They're young, they're still idealists, they don't think like that. Some of them might even vote for Trump, just because he's an anti-establishment figure, and because the free trade positions of Trump and Sanders are more aligned. Who knows? But I think it could be that a lot of them will just sit it out, in which case you'll have a lower than normal turnout, and that will help Trump. So if you're going to watch this on election night, turn the TV on, you know, if you're on MSNBC or whatever you can get here in Germany or wherever you watch it. When you hear the exit polls, don't pay any attention to the numbers, who voted for whom, because that'll be wrong probably. Pay attention to any information you can get on the turnout. How many registered voters actually went to the polls. That'll be the number that'll tell you who's probably going to win. Okay? I think I'll stop there. If I spoke for about the right amount of time, Jacob?
Yeah.
I'll stop there. Look, there's a lot more to be said, and there's going to be question and answers later, and so we'll reserve that period for whatever you want to know about. Meanwhile, here's the magazine, current issue. There's a lot to be learned about the election in here too. The cover piece is by Jonathan Haidt, one of America's most prominent social critics and commentators on nationalism and globalism. Again, something that applies to the American circumstance right now, but also to yours and to Europe's. And then we have a piece in here by Michael Barone, who is the Dean of American Political Analysis, the author of the American Political Almanac. And he gets into a level of granularity here about the characteristics of this political season that I can't beat. I mean, this is his job. So I'll tell you what I'll do. I've got 2 copies of the magazine. I'll let them roam around the room during the time we eat, just so you can get an idea what's in here.
Okay. Well,
I'll
thank
be back
you very
later.
much.